There's an old joke, and I'm almost certain that all of you have probably heard it before, so I won't dive too deep into it. But it's the story about the Jewish man that was shipwrecked and stuck on an island. And finally, after years and years of living there, he was rescued, and the rescuers were shocked. He had survived so well there. He built himself a place to live. He had found a water source. He found food, all of those things. But what really shocked them was that he built not one, but 2 synagogues on the island, right? That's the joke. And they asked him, why did you build 2 synagogues? And he said, this is the one that I go to. And if you know the punchline, right? That's the one I wouldn't even step foot in. It's an old joke, but I want us to hold on to that, and we're going to come back to that in a little while at the end. The sermon I want to offer today is not a sermon that I particularly enjoy offering. And the reason is that it's about Israel, and it's about something that's been happening in Israel lately that I'm not very pleased with. And I'm very wary about sharing public criticisms of Israel, because even though I think that one can criticize the country out of love, out of wanting what's best for that country, and that this is what I have to share is a fair criticism, we see what happens in the world. There are people who take these criticisms out of context, and they criticize not out of love, but out of hate. And especially when a rabbi or other leader in an institution speaks out in this way, it's easy for people to use that as defense of criticisms that aren't fair. But that's the key word here, is fair. And I'm not sure how many of you have been following the events that have been happening in Israel, particularly the story of what's been going on at the Kotel. For those of you who aren't aware, if anyone joining us at home isn't aware, the Kotel is the western wall of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. It is the only remaining spot of what used to be the sacred center of Jewish life, where every Jew would go for the pilgrimage festivals, when they would come to Yerushalayim to offer animals, to offer sacrifice, to offer worship to God. And for many, many generations, we weren't able to go there. But since Jerusalem was unified in 1967, it's been an area where Jews could again go, and they could pray, and they could worship and visit the remnant, what's the holiest site in our tradition. But starting in 1967, when the Israeli government took over the Kotel, the wall, they gave and created the position of the rabbi of the Western Wall, who has total authority and control over what happens there. And as an Orthodox rabbi in an Orthodox institution, the Kotel was set up like an Orthodox synagogue, with a mechitza down the middle, a men's side, and a women's side. And on the men's side, you'll find people putting on tefillin, people wearing talitot, people davening, services going on, multiple Torah scrolls, so that someone who wants can lead a service and run a service and read from the Torah. On the women's side, there are people praying, but you can't find tefillin, you can't find talitot, and you can't find a Sefer Torah. And since the late 80s, there's been a group called the Women of the Wall, who have been coming every month on Rosh Chodesh to pray at the Kotel, sneaking in oftentimes a Torah scroll so that they can have a full service, wearing talitot, wearing tefillin. And they've been met at different times with more or less aggression for coming to do this, coming to pray at the holiest site in our tradition. And in 2016, we're almost done with the history, I promise, there was an agreement reached. Natan Sharansky brokered a deal between some of the different religious groups in Israel, the Haredi, the Orthodox, the Masorti, the Conservative, to create an egalitarian space at the Kotel. At Robinson's Arch nearby, an archaeological site, there was always a small space that Jewish youth groups from the non-Orthodox groups would go, or when they were visiting their communities, and they could have an egalitarian service there. And this deal was that the government would build it out So it was equal in its size and grandeur to the rest of the kotel and had all the amenities that one would need, and you could have a full service there. That was in 2016, so the story's done, right? It never happened. The area was never completed, the deal was never followed through with, and now, almost on a regular basis each month, not just at the kotel and the women's side when women of the wall go there, but in the egalitarian space, groups that are trying to do nothing more than to pray, but pray in a different way than what some Jews accept, are being met with words, sometimes physical violence, sometimes the destruction of things. It's not been going well. So that brings us to yesterday. Yesterday was Rosh Chodesh. We begin the month of Av. And yesterday, Lucia da Silva had her bat mitzvah at the kotel. She's a 12-year-old girl from the city of Seattle, and she wanted to have her bat mitzvah in Israel. So there, while she had her bat mitzvah as part of the monthly Rosh Chodesh service for women of the wall, as expected, there were protests and disruptions. According to some news reports, for a group of less than 100, there were thousands of Orthodox Jews who stood there to protest this 12-year-old girl from Seattle celebrating her bat mitzvah, celebrating her commitment to Judaism, her commitment to the land of Israel. In the women's section, groups of Orthodox women called the girls and others with them heretics. They used another word that I'm not going to speak from the bima, but referring to the oldest profession in existence. Some of them blew whistles to block out the service and to disrupt their prayer so they couldn't hear each other, and do other things to interrupt and stop the service. From the men's sections, they received similar shouts of vulgarity. There's videos floating around online that you can watch. Nice, stark, God-fearing men in their hats and their strimals and their jackets and their suits, giving these girls the middle finger, cursing at them, throwing things. It's awful. And you might say, well, they did go into the women's section to an Orthodox space. In a way, they're provoking it. But just a few weeks ago, there was another young man, Seth Mann, who had his bar mitzvah at the egalitarian space, the space promised for egalitarian prayer. But what happened then? A group of Orthodox protesters showed up. They blew whistles. They cursed at participants. They even tore up Sidurim. They tore up Sidurim. When I read that, it took me back to 3 years ago. I actually spoke during the same parsha I found in my notes. After the Rosh Chodesh celebration, when some of the Sidurim were taken from women of the wall, and the group of Haredi men burned them. Burned them. The Siddur, the text, the words of prayer to God that are too precious for these women or these non-Orthodox Jews to say, but they're precious enough that they can be burned, just as the Nazis did. So what can we take away from this? What can we take away from all of this that's going on? In our parsha this morning, God commands the Israelites that when they enter the land, they have to inhabit it. And that command comes with stipulations of what it means to inhabit the land of Israel. Each of the tribes are given different responsibilities. Each of the tribes are given different portions of land and roles in order to take care of the Jewish homeland, the Jewish state. And the rabbis look at that division of different responsibilities and the division of land, and they ask, why was it done this way? And their lesson is simple, but one that in 2,000 years we haven't learned as a people. That no Jew, no tribe, no denomination, no sect has any more right to the land of Israel, to the Torah, to our traditions than any other. It is the equal right and the equal inheritance of each and every Jew. And it's not up to the people, the leaders of the land, to decide who gets what spot. Because God knew that even the great leaders of old are still human, and that the land would not be divided fairly. So instead, it's divinely divided up, divinely ensured that each and every Israelite has a portion, has a place, has a role in the Holy Land. But that's where our Parsha ends. And then we come back to today. And today there are those who claim that the land belongs more to them than to other Jews. On Rosh Chodesh Av, a 12-year-old girl was verbally attacked because she wanted to have her bat mitzvah at the kotel. A young Jewish girl from Seattle, from a city where I don't know if any of you know much about Seattle, but it's pretty out there as far as cities in the United States go. And Zionism is not a very popular idea there. So a girl who at home has to defend her Zionism, her love of Israel, and in Israel has to defend her Judaism and her love of God and the Jewish people and of Torah. So Rosh Chodesh Av, in a few days, or a little over a week, we commemorate Tisha B'Av. We commemorate the destruction of the temple. We commemorate one of the worst atrocities in the ancient story of our people, when we are expelled and spread throughout the different lands, where after one land and one generation, we again faced hatred and expulsion. For the past 2,000 years, until our dream of a Jewish homeland, a place that Jews would be safe, was finally realized in 1948. But on Tisha B'Av, we remember the temple was destroyed not because the people weren't obeying mitzvot, the rabbis tell us. It wasn't their lack of keeping kosher or keeping Shabbat or anything else. It was for sinat chinam, baseless hatred, Jews hating Jews for no good reason. That was why this tragedy befell us. So after 2,000 years, the dream of a Jewish state, a place where we were safe that was our own, was finally realized. That dream was born in our ancient texts and prayed for. It started to manifest in the 1900s. In 1917, in the Zionist manifesto issued by the World Zionist Organization, the day after the Balfour Declaration, they proclaimed loudly the time had come to make that dream a reality, to begin immediately to build the Jewish national home upon sound foundations, thoroughly Hebrew, thoroughly national, thoroughly free and democratic. That was their dream. In 1948, that dream was realized. But today, we have to ask ourselves, is Israel the homeland for every single Jew? And it's a difficult question, because I think it is the homeland and should be the homeland for every single Jew. And that each Jew has a responsibility to love and to support Israel. But the country, the government, has the same duty and responsibility back to each and every Jew. Not just those in Israel, but those of us here in the diaspora. It's a two-way street. So Israel should and must be a homeland for all Jews. If it deserves the name of being the Jewish state, it has to be a place for each and every one of us. So it takes me back to that joke. The man on the island, he at least built the shul that he wouldn't set foot in. Today there's a new trend of not even wanting that other synagogue to exist, going out of your way to make sure that it doesn't exist, that those who pray differently don't have a space for it, those who believe differently don't have a place to share their beliefs and to be together. We have to get back to the man on the island. It's time to build those other shuls, those other spaces, to return to the vision and the dream of a Jewish homeland, thoroughly Hebrew, thoroughly national, thoroughly free, and democratic. Shabbat Shalom.